You're welcome to Business Highlights on Trust TV, where I take you through some of the biggest economic and business developments of the week. My name is Chamun Dabeng, and I'll be your host. Let's talk numbers. We're opening the floor with the bull and the bear on the market. Well, the market had opened the week in green. However, by Friday, it had recorded 4 consecutive days of negative closes, driven majorly by banking and consumer goods stocks as investors considered low-risk asset classes in the review trading week. The Nigerian stock market fell by 0.45% or 127 billion naira week over week as the trading week ended on July 22nd. Nigeria's Central Bank's Monetary Policy Committee made the decision to hike the monetary policy rate to 14% in a bid to curb inflation. Now, this pushed investors to look at low-risk assets. On Friday, the positive year-to-date return for the stock market was lower, printing at positive 21.69%. In total, there were 3,600 deals with a volume of 205.055 million, valued at 3.058 billion naira. The top 3 gainers for the week were International Breweries PLC, Linkage Assurance PLC, and New Insurance PLC were up by 9.09, 7.41, and 7.26% respectively. And for the top 3 losers, there were May Baker, RT Briscoe, and West African Gas Pipeline Company, and they were down by 10, 9.09, and 7.31% respectively. Now we have top stories right after the break. You're welcome back to Business Highlights on Trust TV. My name is Chamun Dabeng, and like I said, it's time for top stories. Now, there have been quite a few notable developments in the business sector and for the Nigerian economy this week. And I'm joined by policy analyst Faiz Mohammed Ali. You are welcome to the show. It's great to have you here. Now, the Central Bank of Nigeria's Monetary Policy Committee announced that the benchmark interest rate has been hiked once again. Now, if you recall, after 2 years of taking a hold stance, the NPC in May made the decision to hike the interest rate from 11.5% to 13%, going up 150 basis points. And responding to inflationary trends once again, the NPC hiked the interest rate by 100 basis points, taking it up to 14%. Now, all other parameters have remained constant. However, what will be the impact of this on lending rates? Before we get to hear from our guest in the studio, let's take a look at this report.
And as regards tightening policy stance, members were unanimous that given the aggressive increase in inflation, coupled with the resultant negative consequences, particularly on purchasing power of the poor, as well as retarding growth, there is a need to continue to tighten. However, the policy dilemma was hinged around the level of tightening needed to rein in inflation without dampening manufacturing output, which could result from the higher cost of borrowing. Committee thus voted unanimously to raise the monetary policy rate, MPR. One member voted to increase the MPR by 150 basis points, 6 members by 100 basis points, 1 member by 75 basis points, and 3 members by 50 basis points. Consequently, the committee resolved to increase the MPR by 100 basis points from 13% to 14%.
All right, so Nigeria's inflation rate continues to increase on a month-on-month basis. Right now, we're sitting on 18.6%. How is this going to actually help to curb inflationary trends? Is this a good move by the NPC? What do you think?
Well, what the CBN is hoping is that this is going to tighten liquidity within the economy and thereby spur foreign inflows into the country, considering the scarcity of FX we've had over the past couple of months. Now, over the past few days, we've seen how the naira has continuously fallen against the dollar, and they're hoping that by ensuring a higher interest rate, they're going to be able to curb that level of inflation. But it's interesting to note that, as you rightly said, that the last time that the CBN increased interest rates to this level was in February of 2019, I believe. And despite that and other complementary measures taken by the Apex Bank, it did not have any real effect on the state of inflation in the country. Currently, inflation is at 18%, and the fact of the matter is at 15%, the value of the currency already halves every 2 years. So what they need to do is, what the measures they have in place are going to stabilize inflation, possibly, but not curb it entirely.
All right. So now we've seen several sectors of the economy that are fully dependent or highly dependent on lending rates. Now, of course, this is the first thing that so many Nigerians are going to think about. It was a discussion when it was raised to 13%. How is this going to affect the lending rates? Now, we have the agricultural sector, we have the manufacturing sector. These are just examples of sectors that are very dependent on lending.
Right.
They take these loans from banks, they use it to carry out their businesses, pay back the loans and all of that. How is this going to affect it now?
Any business or individual looking to access credit facilities from any of these institutions is going to have to pay higher rates. There's really no way about it. And that's going to continue until we see a stabilization of the naira against the dollar.
All right, so also still looking at the effects, is this going to also affect the ease at which an individual or business can actually access loans today?
The short or the long answer, Chairman?
Anyone you want.
The short answer is it's going to be much more difficult, simply because they're working with a much smaller pool of resources with which to access these credit facilities. So therefore, not only because the pool of resources that they have has reduced, but also the pressure on the naira has reached a point where the dollars that they're going to be able to access on a day-to-day basis keeps decreasing. So it's going to be much harder for creditors to get the loans that they're looking for.
All right, so still looking at the production sector itself, Nigeria is a country that is highly dependent on importation because we're not a country of producers. So there have been policies that have actually been put in place that are supposed to boost local production. Is this going to be a setback for this desire or this desire for Nigeria to become a producing nation?
A few days ago, I think it was the Ministry of Finance that announced that we've reached a point where our revenues are far below our ability to service debt. I think we are currently at 118% of our debt profile. That means regardless of the situation, because of that particular metric, it's going to be much more difficult to spur local production either way.
All right, so we're still taking a look at the CBN's decision and taking or asking if the CBN alone or raising the NPR can actually tackle inflation. Now, the government itself or the CBN itself, do you feel like they put in total consideration of structural challenges that the country is going through that have basically become drivers of inflation? You take a look at insecurity, you take a look at the state of our roads, you take a look at the lack of electricity. I mean, all of these challenges that we're facing, has anything really been done about it? What's the point of actually hiking up the NPR to 14% when these challenges have still yet to be addressed?
Unfortunately, the reality of the situation is that we are in a lame duck session of this administration. Therefore, there aren't going to be any new policies that come into place that arrest a lot of these challenges. And until there is a new administration in place that has a concrete direction that investors can look forward to, that's really going to be the trend that we see continue. When you look at the totality of the issues that Nigeria is facing from an economic standpoint, it's also important to remember that there is a lot of external pressure. That is that the oil market specifically, since we removed the subsidy sometime last year, we've been really at the mercy.
What subsidy removed?
Well, we'll get to that a little bit later.
Yeah, we're definitely going to get into that
a little bit later.
Because as it is, we're looking at billions, or only God knows how much at this point, that is going to be paid for subsidy.
Exactly. Well, it's left us at the mercy of the international oil market. And because oil has become much more expensive than it was, even when the PIA was passed, it's a far more difficult issue for the government to tackle. Because it doesn't have control over the pricing issues outside the country.
All right, so anyway, speaking about the oil market, there is a discussion right now around the NNPC, which, by the way, was unbundled. Now, the restructuring of NNPC is definitely a part of the provisions of the Petroleum Act. Now, if you've been following the news, you would know that the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation has been unbundled and restructured and is now the National Petroleum Company Limited. And what this means is that it will now act as a commercial venture. And the move so far has actually garnered so many reactions from different people. And one of the biggest questions is how exactly is this going to benefit the Nigerian masses? Let's take a look at this report.
NNPCL, formerly known as NNPC, has been restructured into a commercial venture which the federal government believes will strengthen the capacity and market relevance of Nigeria's oil industry. According to President Muhammadu Buhari, NNPCL will operate free from institutional regulations such as the Treasury Single Account, Public Procurement and Fiscal Responsibility Act. President, National Association for Energy Economics, Professor Yinka Omorogbe, breaks this down.
NNPC is now going to be running like a commercial enterprise in line with commercial considerations. So this should mean that NNPC is no longer like a cash cow that the government goes to when it needs something. It means that it should be able to operate commercially, having its own money, delivering returns to the government, acting on behalf of its shareholder. Its shareholder is the government. Okay. But you know that many of us don't realize that the government really works for us. That's what it's supposed to be. So that's why you find they're saying, oh, 200 million Nigerians, so to speak. So it should be delivering returns. It should be delivering maximum returns and maximum benefits. Its subsidiaries should now be functioning optimally and actually generating revenue.
Professor Omorogbe also speaks on the possibility of privatization in the future.
If one looks at the Petroleum Industry Act and you look at the portion on NNPC, you'll see that NNPC, there is a provision that is allowing shares to be sold in NNPC, and that will happen gradually. But what it is now is commercialization. Commercialization is basically a company acting more in alignment with commercial considerations and acting more like a standard company. So you see it's NNPC Limited. It's actually a karma company. It actually means that it can be regulated. We will see whether that is really so if we see a sanction imposed on NNPC.
Energy expert Yabagi Yusuf Sani expressed reservation on the impact of the restructuring of the oil company on the lives of average Nigerians.
Something built on nothing, how do you expect anything to come out of it? It's fraud. We have been taking for a ride in this country for too long. So that's why I say it's a fraud. It's a fraud that is being perpetuated in this country, and then we're laughing stock to the whole world. They know, they're laughing at us because they know what is happening. They don't run their systems like this. I'm telling you that even companies like Shell, Mobil, and what have you, they run their system under an ICT environment so that checks and balances will take place, so that they know exactly what is happening. We don't know in this country. Nothing will be different. In fact, it is not going to be more entrenched. That's what they are trying to do. So that they take your attention away from what they are trying to do. And it is true. I'm telling you the basic things, the fundamentals, which are there. I'm not just saying it. Go and check. Anybody can go and check. They'll see all these things. From the PIA, the fraudulent PIA that was passed, to the NNPCL that they are deceiving Nigerians, that is now their company. I don't know. When I don't have 1 naira, how does it become my company?
Yeah, about two different reactions right there. Engineer Sani really went off on this move by the NNPC or the federal government. Yes, now as Professor Omorogbe said, a lot of Nigerians don't know that the government should actually work for the Nigerian citizens. But this move to, restructure NNPC to NNPCL, is it really working for, or is it really going to work for the Nigerian populace? At the end of the day, is it going to be just a select few of people that are going to benefit from this move?
The hope is that with the transition of the NNPC to a public liability company, that its profits and the taxes and royalties it's going to pay are going to go directly to the government account, which will then be used for the benefit of the nation in its entirety. Now, whether or not it is actually going to operate in a function that really is indicative of it being a private company is something that remains to be seen, especially because we're still seeing that it's being governed by the same set of actors that it was prior to it being a commercial entity. Really, it's going to it's really a wait and see approach right now as to whether or not there's going to be any benefit down the line. I'm sure one of the arguments that's going to be made is that we're going to see further investments into the downstream sector, and this is going to hopefully help with energy security for the citizens down the line. But it's still something that we have to wait and see.
All right. Well, wait and see. At the end of the day, what more can you really do? It's something that just happened. But yes, the country has seen or found itself in a state of consistent energy crisis. You know, we have the cost of kerosene has shot up, Jet A1 fuel has shot up, fuel itself has gone up, and this has been the situation for a long time. I mean, we've had issues with fuel scarcity where you have a really long queues, and you know there are also dysfunctional refineries. Now, how exactly is this unbundling and commercialization of the NNPC going to work with all of these challenges that are still there? Can this actually help to bridge the energy crisis or fix the energy crisis that the country is in?
Well, one of the arguments that was made prior to the commercialization of the NNPC and prior to the DPR being shuttered was that doing so would simply be a bifurcation of duties, whereby instead of having, you know, a centralized authority that could regulate the price of oil and ensure parity among the various operators, what you're having now is a bifurcation of duties across several regulators. And that is going to, rather than create transparency, which is precisely what the turning the company into a private entity is supposed to ensure, it's going to create more bureaucracy. And the more bureaucracy there is, the harder it is to really look through the more opaque operations that the NNPC is known for. I think that's really the argument that Engineer Sani was making, that really they're complicating the issue rather than making it easier for people to understand how NNPC operates.
All right, so now the country itself is still importing fuel. Nigeria is one of the biggest oil producers in the world. We're still importing fuel at this point. Now, is the issue really about unbundling the NNPCL? What is actually, I mean, is the government really even doing anything to fix the issues with the refineries? We have refineries, all of them are not functioning.
You're right, actually. The main issue is the simple fact that we import fuel rather than refine the fuel that we already produce. And we're buying it at inflated rates. We're also in a position whereby the price of fuel has reached an all-time high on the world market. And because to a certain extent we are at the mercy of the price fluctuations, Nigerians are still going to find a situation whereby fuel prices are consistently high or go consistently higher over time as inflation increases. Therefore, the issue really isn't to do with the NNPC and turning into a commercial venture. It's ensuring that the refineries we have in place, whether they're privately owned or publicly owned, are up to standard and are working for the benefit of the Nigerian public.
All right. Now, there is a provision still within the PIA itself that says, okay, fine, at some point shares will be sold to the Nigerian populace. I can literally see a smirk on his face already. There is a lot of question around this. We've had a privatization attempt with the electricity sector, and we know how that actually went at the end of the day. So what do you think about this provision that's being made in the PIA?
The best indicator of future occurrences is past behavior. Therefore, just like you said, when we look at how privatization has been handled in the electricity sector and everywhere else, we can see that there are several dangers in place. It's like you said, the issue really is the question mark that's in place. At some point in the future, it will be opened up to the public and then listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. At what point? For the foreseeable future, the government is still the largest shareholder. Not only are they the largest shareholder, but they will be receiving the majority of the profits that the NNPC makes. So is it really a public company? If Nigerians don't have even, as Engineer Sani says, 1 naira invested in it, we'll see.
Yes, he did bring up a very reasonable argument when I was actually speaking to him. He asked a lot of questions that will trigger you to think. At the end of the day, if the Nigerian man is not making money off of it, then how exactly is it for the Nigerian man or woman out there? Now, still looking at the capability for the NNPCL to function efficiently. Of course, this move was to promote efficiency and to promote competitiveness within that sector. Do you feel that it's actually going to work out, the way that the government is hoping it will play out, considering, like you said, it's still the same workforce and we're still importing fuel into the country? What exactly do you see going down in the long run?
The one way in which it will be different, or it can be different, is in investments. How precisely is the management of NNPC going to invest in new forms of energy generation that are going to make NNPC competitive on a global scale? If they start to pivot towards more gas-oriented than oil-oriented ventures, or if they look towards more renewable energy sources, these sort of things that take away pressure from just the oil market and bring us more in line with more modern takes on energy transition, then the argument can be made that yes, okay, the NNPC is looking towards the future. Currently, however, we know that the portfolio on that end isn't very strong. So just like we said earlier, it's really a wait-and-see approach when it comes to the NNPC right now. They don't seem like a publicly listed company. They're not currently operating like a publicly listed company. And the history of privatization within Nigeria is fraught with so many issues, such that we currently don't have a lot of confidence in the way that the NNPC is going to operate moving forward.
All right, like you said, it just has to be a wait and see issue, should I say, pardon me. Hopefully we'll get those answers within the next 1, 2, 3 months, hopefully. The earlier the better. Well, we have come to the end of our show for today, and I would like to thank my guests in the studio. Thank you so much, Mr. Faiz, for being a part of the show, and to our viewers out there, thank you so much for joining us. Well, please do well to follow us on our social media platforms. You can find us on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. All you need to do is look up Trust TV News. You definitely find us there. Well, once again, we've come to the end. My name is Chamun Dabeng. Come back again next week. Let's talk numbers.